I'm good. All right, y'all ready to roll? All right. It is week 3, so this is the last one, and I'm not going to make it over a lot of material that I had planned on talking about. So if I don't get to, I will answer Jim's question because I promised today. But if I don't get to something that you think is really important, it's just because I ran out of time. But we're looking at Islam, what nobody would tell you. This is week 3. And last week we left off on Muhammad and women, which is a total disaster. And so I think we left off on the very uplifting topic of female genital mutilation, which is a practice that they actually do engage in. I gave you the statistics on it. And then we did not quite make it into Muhammad's marriages, which is a lot of fun. So let's look at that. Muhammad was married either 11 or 13 times. 2 of them are a little bit unsure, but I don't have time to go through all of Muhammad's wives, just the fun ones. But let me open up in prayer. We're going to go through 3 of Muhammad's wives that are particularly interesting. So, Lord, we ask that you would be with us, that you would guide our conversation, that you would guide this series, and we ask that you would guide our hearts. In your name, amen. All right, so Muhammad's marriages. Muhammad, like I said, Muhammad was married a whole bunch, 11, 13 times. I'm just going to stick with 11. But one of his wives, her name is Zainab. Have you ever wondered, do you know that Muslims do not practice adoption? They don't. There's no adoption in Islam countries. And so, since so many of you didn't know, then I guess you probably don't know why, which I'm going to share with you why, which is really, really interesting. So Zainab, Muhammad had an adopted son who was married to Zainab. This is his son. This is Muhammad. Not really, but this is pictures of them, and this is Zainab. And so Muhammad has an adoptive son, and he basically forces this woman to marry his adopted son, and eventually she agrees. And she marries Muhammad's adopted son. But what's going to happen is that Muhammad is going to stop over. You know, you ever have the in-laws just kind of stop by? Muhammad's just going to pull up a stop by here, and his son isn't home, but she is, and she was not expecting a visitor, and so she's not clothed. And when Muhammad sees her, he immediately desires her. So he tries to get rid of it, but it doesn't go away. It just kind of stays there with him. He desires his adopted son's wife that he actually kind of arranged. This, of course. So what's going to happen is his son is going to find out that Muhammad is interested in his wife, and his son starts having he starts having issues, he can't perform. So he talks to people, and people tell him that the reason that you have these issues is because Allah is angry at you. And the reason that Allah is angry at you is because Muhammad wants your wife. So he divorces his wife, and he allows Muhammad to take his wife, because now she's divorced, right? Except there's one little problem. Anybody want to guess what the little problem is? Well, the divorce is fine, under certain circumstances. No, she's not pregnant.
Muhammad's probably already married.
Well, yeah, he's got lots of wives, but it don't matter. What the one little problem that they run into is marrying your son's wife is forbidden in the Quran. That's kind of a problem, right? So the way around that is Muhammad does away with adoption. Therefore, Zayed was never his son. Therefore, he is free to marry Zainab, and that forbidden adoption still stands today.
Parallel to the Anglican Reformation?
Yes, but the difference is that we don't look at Henry VIII and say he is worthy of following in every step. And this is the same thing. I'm going to bring this up a million times. Christianity has made tons of disasters. The problem that Muslims run into is who they claim Muhammad is. And if he is the one true prophet worthy of all emulation, then his life better look like Jesus. And when it doesn't, it's fair game to put it on the table. Now, you can bring up Henry VIII, and Henry VIII is a total disaster. And we could go through countless Christians that have done terrible things. But we're not comparing Muhammad to Henry VIII. We're comparing Muhammad to Jesus. And that's where it's different. Does that make sense?
I just thought it was fun.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think I told the story. When I became Anglican, I was Roman Catholic, but not really. Like, we never went. And when I became Episcopalian, the first thing that my best friend said to me is, "Isn't that the church that started because somebody wanted a divorce?" And I had no idea. I was like 15 years old. I had never heard of it. And I'm like, I'm sure that's not true. Turns out it's true. Who knew? But again, not Jesus. So this is the whole adoption thing right here with Zainab that you got going on. That's wife number one. Wife number two would be Sophia, and Sophia, this is not as funny, it's just sad, is somebody that is captured in battle along with her husband. And so he captures, they're both captured. He has the husband tortured as he believes that he has information concerning a hidden treasure. It's like the Goonies all over again, except no sloth. Kind of ruins the story. So he has the husband tortured, and then eventually he just has the husband beheaded. But that very same night, he takes Sapphira and makes her his wife and consummates the marriage the very night that her husband dies, with armed guards present. I fail to remember where Jesus did things like this. And so, that's wife number two, which is pretty rough. Like I said, he's got 11 wives, and 3 of them are of particular interest to me. The third one is the most popular, the most well-known. Does anybody know her name? Aisha.
Before, right? Because Khadijah was the first.
I don't know the ordering of the wives. So you got Aisha. She was 6 years old when she was betrothed to Muhammad, and 9 years old when the marriage was consummated. Now, Muslims will do dances around this to try to make it that she was older. But if you go back and you look at any documentation that has any historic worth, this is what you're going to get. Even if you go on Wikipedia and look it up, this is what you're going to get. Because every historical document that has any legitimacy attached to it will tell you this story. Now, this is not a story that they like, so they want to rewrite the history of it, and they'll tell you that she was much older when she was consummated. And some people will tell you she was much older when she was betrothed. But this is actually practice in Islam. This is not a one-off. So it has become a practice to take brides at age 9 within Islam, as many believe that it pleases Allah because Muhammad did that. In fact, they'll tell you it's recommended, it has been recommended, it's not universally recommended, but it has been recommended in Islam to do your best to ensure that your daughters do not see their first blood in your house. What that means is make sure that they do not hit puberty while they are still in your house. Marry them off before puberty. So this is Aisha, which is the third wife out of the 11. And that's pretty much the only wives that I was going to go through. And then we're going to move to another what we're looking at today is like some doctrines within Islam that are super interesting. And for me, they're the most interesting aspects. So we're going to actually go in and start looking at some Islamic kind of doctrines that I think will really open up some eyes on what what you're seeing and what they're doing. So let's move into Taqiyya. Does anybody know what Taqiyya is?
Is that where they can tell a lie?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
I know what it is.
That is it. That is it. Taqiyya, right there. So Taqiyya is an idea, a doctrine, a concept in Islam that enables Muslims to tell a lie if it is for the benefit of Islam or their own protection. So you can see, I'm sure I don't have to go into details, although I'm going to, how this can go off the rails like pretty easily. So Taqiyya is Islam. In Islam, lies are accepted as long as they serve to further Islam. This is Quran 16. Muhammad ordered an assassination, and to do so, he approved the use of lies to gain access to the victims. So this goes all the way back to Muhammad, but there's a more interesting kind of ideas attached to this that are more recent. So the quote is, Allah's apostle, would you like that I kill him? The Prophet said yes. Then allow me to say a false thing. The Prophet said you may say it. This goes back to the hadith right there. Lying is permitted, especially against your enemy. And where this really kind of fleshes out, you can trace it back to the Quran, you can trace it back to the hadith, but where it really comes out is the relationship between the Sunni and the Shia. And this is where Taqiyya really comes into existence. So are you familiar with the relationship between the Sunni and the Shia? Yeah. Are you familiar that there's two groups of Muslims, and then within them they have subcategories? So look at it this way. Protestants and Catholics, and in them they have subcategories. Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopal, right? Does that make sense? Islam has the same thing. They have Sunnis, they have Shia, and then they have subcategories in there. So we're just going to look at the Sunni and the Shia. But Taqiyya comes about because, do you know which one's bigger? Anybody? Okay, Sunni is much larger. It's about 85% of Muslims are Sunni. And Shia is much less, about 15% are Shia. Interestingly, I believe the stronghold of Shia are in Iran. And so, but you do have these two groups. So it's important to know the two groups. And do you know what happens when there's a big group and a little group generally? What takes place? What's that?
I mean, the big group is the things they have more power or rights than the smaller group.
Yeah, well, so what do they do to the little group? Yeah, they bully them, they pick on them, they treat them as second class. So the Sunni don't particularly like the Shia. And they pick on them. And so, and not just pick on them though, like some of the stuff is pretty harsh. And so the way Tekiah came about, I might have another slide in here before I can, before I get into what I'm sharing with you is on the next slide, but I do need to run through this really quick. It's justified in the Quran, it's justified in Islamic texts like the Hadith, as well as the actions of Muhammad. But Tekiah is considered a virtue, an actual duty. Like it's not considered something that you're ashamed of. Like if you were doing confession, you might confess that you lied about something. Tekiah is not something that they would confess. It is considered virtue, a duty to push Islam as far as they can. These are some words from Muhammad. War is deceit. By Allah and Allah willing, if I take an oath and later find something else that is better than that, then I do what is better and do away with the oath. This is like Jerry Maguire. You remember Jerry Maguire? The movie Jerry Maguire? The guy would only do a deal based on a handshake, and he said, "My word is as strong as oak." And then they found out that oak is not very strong, according to that guy. This is the same thing. I mean, Muhammad's basically saying, hey, if I make a deal with you, but a better deal comes along, I'm taking the better deal, and our deal is off the table. Moving on from there, so we'll actually get to what I was talking about. So Shia have a doctrine called Tekiah. And it starts within the Shia, and the Sunni don't have this. Or they didn't have it. Where they're permitted to tell lies under interrogation so that Shia could masquerade as Sunni in order to not be intimidated, tortured, that sort of thing. So basically, the Shia were allowed to lie and say, no, I'm Sunni, so that the Sunni would not hurt them. Does that make sense? Okay, but it's going to broaden out from there. So the Sunni create their own version of this, because if one version has a good thing, why can't both versions have a good thing, right? So the Sunni are going to create their own version, which is also adopted by the Shia. And their version is that its Sunni version involves non-Muslims for the sake of proclaiming or for the sake of furthering Islam. They are allowed to lie to non-Muslims as long as it is for the sake of furthering Islam. Muslims are not to take unbelievers as friends unless they have reason to fear them. They can appear to befriend them until they gain the upper hand. And this is just generally the idea is that, now again, I should preface this. This is not all Muslims. Not all Muslims do this, but some Muslims do this. Just like not all Christians do, some of these things, but some Christians do this. So Tekiah is a real thing in Islam where they're allowed to lie to non-Muslims if they believe that it furthers the cause of Islam. And it started with the Shia, and now it moved to the Sunni, and now they both do it. But the Shia are the ones that really traffic heavily in Tekiah, much more than the Sunni do. It's like kind of like part of their blood. So that's the idea of Tekiah. I think I probably have another. the Quran approves lies. Let not the believers take the disbelievers as friends instead of the believers, and whoever does that will never be helped by Allah in any way except if you indeed fear danger from them. So what this is essentially saying is you can pretend to be friends, you can lie and you can say that we're friends, but you can never actually be friends. And the moment that you get the upper hand, all of this pretending goes out the window. And I'm going to show you where you see this in Muhammad's life, where you see this actually, the example set by Muhammad in this whole idea. But this is the idea of Taqiyya. I think I have something else. Muslims are commanded to not be friends with non-Muslims. They can pretend to be your friend when they are in a vulnerable state. If you go back, and I shared with you at the very beginning of this, there's two cities that are very, very important. And the first one is Mecca, and the second one is Medina. And the reason that they're important is because they're a dividing line in Islam of how they understand the world working. So when Muhammad was in Mecca, he was weak. And so you'll have a ton of verses that come out that are in the Quran that come from that time when Muhammad was weak. Some verses are like, there's no compulsion in Islam. Verses like, you have your religion, I have my religion. It was in Muhammad's best interest to say those things because he was the one in danger. When Muhammad moved to Medina, he is no longer the one in danger. He is the one who has force and power, and his words and his ideas radically change. And you don't hear Muhammad saying there is no compulsion in religion anymore, or in Islam. You don't hear Muhammad saying you have your religion and I have my religion. You hear very different things. And I'm going to share with you why, but it goes to the doctrine of abrogation. Is anybody familiar with the doctrine? This is probably the most interesting thing I have come across in Islam, is the doctrine of abrogation. Anybody familiar with this idea? Okay. So the doctrine of abrogation it has two applications, so I'm going to share both of them with you. But the first one refers to the idea that the early parts of the Quran, the Mecca verses, generally the peace verses, seem to contradict the latter part of the Quran, the Medina verses or the violent verses. In Islam, they actually refer to them as the Meccan verses and the Medina verses. So this is a real thing, that there's a distinction between the Meccan verses, early Islam, and the Medina verses, later Islam. And so what they say is, when you're reading the Quran, you're trying to wrestle with these various contradictions that you're running into. Like, fight against the infidel, and there is no compulsion in Islam. How do you reconcile these? And so what they come up with is the doctrine of abrogation. And abrogation is simply whatever came later trumps what came earlier. That's the first part of the doctrine of abrogation. So you can say, yes, they say there's no compulsion in religion, but those verses have been superseded by later verses from Muhammad. And so they're no longer in play, if you will. Now, what's interesting about this is, so early scholars trying to figure out how to make sense of the peaceful, violent contradictions in the Quran came up with the theory of abrogation, that whatever came later supplants the earlier verses in the Quran. So abrogation 2 is where you can really see this outworking. So the other view of abrogation is both verses are equal in its application, but it's determined by the circumstances they find themselves in. So, for example, if you are weak, if you are outnumbered, if you are living in a place where there's more Hindus or more Christians or more Buddhists or whatever, if you're not in a place of power, then you punt to the Mecca verses. There is no compulsion in Islam. You have your religion, I have my religion. Because you're not in a place of strength. Therefore, you can't fight. But if you're in a place of strength, then you go to the Medina verses. And so this is the idea of abrogation. And both of them are super interesting. If they're in a weak position, go with the peace and tolerant verses. But if you are in a strong position, go with the violent verses. And this is what you actually saw Muhammad do. They didn't just come up with this. They're looking at how do we do this, and they're looking at what did Muhammad do. Well, when Muhammad was in Mecca, he was weak, and he talked about peace, and you have your religion, and I have my religion. And there's no compulsion in Islam. That's what he did, because he was weak. Remember, he had to flee Mecca, because they were going to kill him. So when he gets to Medina, he gets really strong. He gets a lot of followers following after him. And with all the followers, his message changes significantly. And his message now becomes kill the infidel. And so when you're seeing what they're doing with abrogation, they're just patterning this off of what Muhammad himself actually did, which is what they're supposed to do in Islam. Because Muhammad is the one true final prophet worthy of all emulation. All that they're doing is emulating their prophet. This is what he did. So this is the theory of abrogation. So on the theory of taqiyya, which is the ability to lie, and on the theory of abrogation, does anybody have questions? Thoughts? Yeah.
Where did you say Medina and Mecca were predominantly Shia and Sunni? Which one was which?
No, Muhammad is born in Mecca. He starts in Mecca. And that's where he starts to get he tries to get his religion off the ground. But they're polytheistic. And Islam is absolute monotheism. So they don't receive it well. So they're basically going to kill him. So he has to flee to Medina. When he flees to Medina, it's the same message. It's the same everything. But he starts getting followers. And he starts building it up. Oh yeah, I think Iran is, in modern day, I think Iran, which is all over the news right now, is currently mostly Shia. And Shia only make up about 15% of Muslims, so that's fairly...
But then they weren't so divided between the two areas, what you're saying is
What's that?
Mecca, Medina, Shia, and Sunni.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like, sometimes I think for the most part, the distinction between Shia and Sunni is kind of dissipating.
I'm trying to label one as bad and one as better.
You can't. Because it essentially goes back to, really the distinction between Shia and Sunni really just goes back to the caliphate and who is the rightful predecessor to Muhammad. And the Shia, let me see if I can get this right, the Shia believed that the rightful predecessor to Muhammad was Muhammad's family. It goes down through the family line. The Sunni believed that it should be an election. And that's where you have this divide between Shia and Sunni. Yeah, Jim.
It was successor, not predecessor.
Thank you.
So, yeah, it was succession from Muhammad as to
Yeah.
who was going to run the religion.
Yeah.
And that's where they split off.
Yeah. So yeah, one thought that there should be an election, and one thought that it should follow in the line of the family. Anything else? Tikea, abrogation? Because now we're going to move into the actual Quran, which I think is kind of interesting, and we have about like 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll move into the Hadith, and I'll give Jim his answer, all displayed up there. All right, so they're known as the Mecca or Medina verses. Muhammad's weak early on, but strong later on. So here's some examples of this. We do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, except that we bring forth one better than it or similar to it. Do you not know that Allah is over all things? So it's the same in Christianity. I mean, we wouldn't say, well, this verse is bad, and we're not reading this verse. We would say, no, all of what's in the Bible is worthy of being taught and for instruction. And so they're saying the same thing. Like we're not getting rid of different verses in here. We're just saying that you can take something that is better, that's similar and better, and move that, and that makes the previous verse obsolete. But let me give you an example of this. This would be the Quran. This is a later Medina verse, and this is an earlier Meccan verse, which is, you have your religion, I have my religion, so this is peace. And up here you have fight against those who have been given the scriptures, and the Jews and the Christians. You can clearly see that there's a distinction here, because it's no longer you have your religion and I have my religion. It's you have your religion, it's different from mine, and now I'm going to fight you because of it.
Based on your chapter numbers, it looks like the last one is much later than the first one.
That's because you don't understand how the Quran is organized, which I'm going to get to, because I think that it's really interesting, because that confused me for a long time. But yeah, if you read the Quran like you read the Bible, this would appear to be the opposite. This is later and this is earlier. But in the Quran, it's not organized the way that you might think that it would be organized. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, I have a hard time saying that word. My mouth just doesn't say it. But the gates of Tajad are closed. And this is a concept in Islam that I think is very, very important, especially for people who want to reinterpret Islam in a friendlier light. So most people assume Muslims are free to interpret the Quran in a variety of ways, just like Christians. And that used to be the case. Initially, they were free, but it produced far too many heretics. So they declared that diligence is closed. Essentially, what they're saying is there is no new interpretation of the Quran. If you're coming up with a new interpretation of the Quran, it's wrong. Because the interpretive time is closed. And so a lot of people who are putting forward the notion that Islam is peace, what they're doing is they're reading the Quran through a different lens. They're reinterpreting it, but in historic Islam, the interpretation period is closed. There's no more creative interpretations coming out. It's just not allowed. Now, again, for a new wave of Muslims want to do that, because a lot of the things in the Quran are not what they want to stand by. And I get that. The problem is historic Islam. And that's what I'm concerned with. I'm not concerned with newer versions. I'm not concerned with new concepts that people have added in, or new interpretations. Historic Islam is grounded on the Prophet Muhammad and the words of the Quran. And I've said in every one of these teachings, it's rotten all the way to the core, because the core is the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. And as long as that's the core of your religion, you're going to have problems. Now again, I've said everything that I'm doing with Muhammad, anybody can do with Jesus. And I have no problem with it. Put Jesus up there and go through his life like I'm doing with Muhammad. I'm good with it, because I think he's going to come out on the other side looking pretty good. Because Jesus didn't do the things that Muhammad did. But reinterpreting the Quran is something that a lot of newer Muslims and people in the West are very interested in doing. But that's not in keeping with historic Islam. So the gates are closed. So the sacred books, they have three kind of categories of sacred books. They have the Quran, they have the Hadith, and then they have the early Sarais, which are the bibliographies of Muhammad. And those are basically their sacred books, all of which are considered authoritative in Islam. But I did give you the order. The Quran is at the top, the Hadith is in second, and then the bibliographies are third. That is the order, but they all are authoritative. It should provide us with yeah, I already went over that. So the Bible and Islam, the Quran is the central religious text of Islam. Muslims believe the Quran was orally revealed by God to the final Islamic prophet Muhammad through the angel Gabriel, and over a period of 23 years. Muhammad did not physically write the Quran. It was written by people around him. He simply received the messages, communicated them to somebody else who wrote it. In much the same manner that Paul didn't write most of Paul's letters, he had people write them for him. I'm not saying that Paul's not the author. He came up with the ideas. He communicated what needed to be written, but he's not the one who physically wrote it. Although there are places where he does physically write it, and he tells you. He tells you, I wrote this with my own hand. See what big letters I'm writing with. But Muhammad and the Quran, same thing. Somebody else is writing it, because largely Muhammad is considered to be illiterate. Muslims, regarding the Quran, Muhammad's most important miracle and proof of his prophethood. So when they look at the Quran is the thing that tells them, yes, Muhammad was the God. The Quran is believed by Muslims to be God's own divine speech, providing a complete code of conduct, although not really, for all facets of life. So that's kind of what they believe about the Quran. It's highly decontextualized book. So there are very few historic events in the Quran. There are very few people's names in the Quran. In fact, I think Muhammad's name only shows up maybe 3 or 4, like a handful of times. Jesus shows up 25 times in the Quran. But there's not a ton of names in the Quran. There's not a ton of places in the Quran. The Book of Mormon has the same thing, which makes it very hard to authenticate anything that's said in there. Like archaeologists prove the Bible all the time. It's amazing. I love when they dig. I'm like, dig as much as possible, because every time they dig up things that are from the Bible. If you went to seminary in the 70s, they would have told you the Hittites don't exist. Until like the 80s and 90s, all of a sudden, we found the Hittites. Like, dig as much as possible. But the Book of Mormon and the Quran have the same problem, is that there's not a whole lot in there to confirm. It's kind of like reading the prophets, but you're only reading the prophecy without the historical context. So it's a bit of that. It's sometimes difficult to figure out if Allah is addressing Muhammad or Muslims or non-Muslims. You just kind of muddle through. You sometimes have problems with that in the Bible as well. But in my reading of the Quran, it is perhaps the least enjoyable book I have ever sat down to read. And it's just very difficult. And because there's not a lot of people and places, historic events, it's just like reading the prophecies, but they never end. Like prophecy after prophecy after prophecy. So the structure of the Quran, which is really interesting, is it's 114 chapters, and it's organized by the longest chapter to the shortest chapter. Now, to me, I'm not saying anything bad, but when Cohen was 5 years old, if I gave him something and I said, hey, could you organize this for me? I could almost guarantee you he's going to organize it biggest, next biggest, next biggest. And that's how the Quran is organized. It's very strange. It's not organized in these messages came first. It's organized by which one is longer and which one is shorter. And that adds to the difficulty of reading the Quran, because they don't, it's just organized by longest to shortest. So there's no connection between the one message and the other message. You're just jumping from message to message. Yeah, Jim.
Well, if it doesn't have names and places and events, how do you know which was written in Mecca and which was written in
Well, they have done, Muslims have done the historic research to be able to kind of put that, just like Christians do, figure out, what the Bible's saying about this. And they feel very confident that they have as good of an understanding of when the messages came as they could possibly have. So I'm just trusting their sources.
And to your point, wouldn't it be written in a peaceful versus non-peaceful, right?
It's not. Yeah. It's just like whichever one was longer and whichever one was shorter. It's very bizarre. I don't understand the reasoning behind structuring it that way, but it makes it it adds to the difficulty of reading the Quran.
It wasn't put together until significantly after
Yes.
Muhammad died.
Yeah. But it's the same thing with the Bible. The Bible wasn't put together till much later, but it's still put together in somewhat of a chronological order. Now there are areas where the order is off, but it's at least in the ballpark. Whereas the Quran is very strangely put together. It makes reading it very difficult. Many words. This is another thing. Even to those who speak Arabic, many of the words in the Quran, like a lot of them, are meaningless words. Like they don't know what it actually means, and they never have. And so there's a lot of scholarly work that they've put in to try and figure out what these words were, but they seem to be words that were associated with Muhammad at that particular time in that particular place, and those words are just gone now. And so we don't know what the words actually mean, which adds to the difficulty of reading the Quran, because you're going to come across words that not only do you not know what it means, nobody knows what it means. And that's kind of wild to me. So the Quran errs. This is the last thing we're going to look at, because this is interesting. I don't know if you know, but the Quran does add a lot of Christianity into it. Or Muhammad adds a lot of Christianity into the Quran, but he jacks everything up. It's astounding. And you can understand why it happens, though, because he can't read and write. This is not the religion of his area. And so he's hearing these stories that are being told, but he doesn't have them in front of him, and even if he did, he can't read, so he wouldn't be able to read them. He's just hearing stories. But he's going to take those stories and he's going to incorporate them into the Quran. But he gets a lot of things wrong, just small, minor things that if you know, then you know. And you're like, that's not right. And so I'm going to show you a couple of things. This is from the Quran. It says, then she brought Jesus to her people, carrying him. They said, "O Mary, you have certainly done a thing unprecedented. O sister of Aaron, your father was not a man of evil, nor was your mother unchaste." Anybody see a problem in there?
Her mother. Her mother wasn't the
They're
one.
talking about her father being possibly.
What's this?
Oh, sister of Aaron, your father was not a man of evil? Meaning, what?
Is that the priest back when Moses
Yeah.
was alive?
Yeah. This is the wrong Mary. Now I do realize that the Bible is full of Marys. Like there's a reason why like Roman Catholics marry their kids Mary, because the Bible's full of Marys. But this is the wrong Mary. If this were the case, if she were the daughter, the sister of Aaron, which is the sister of Moses, she would have been 15th century BC. Unless Mary is 1,500 years old when she bore Jesus, unless Joseph married a 1,500-year virgin, Muhammad got the wrong Mary. And it's because of how they translate the word Maryam and Mary, it just creates problems. But the problem for Islam is if your book is perfect, then this is a problem. I got even a better one for you, and then we're going to close it out. The Quran claims the Quran claims that Moses confronted Aaron and a Samaritan for having made a golden calf for the Israelites while Moses was up on Mount Sinai. You remember the story, right? Anybody see a problem here?
Jesus confronted the Samaritan woman.
Why did Jesus confront the Samaritan woman? Well, let's just say the Samaritans didn't exist until the northern kingdom fell. Like, the Samaritans didn't exist until 722, or even beyond 722. So during Muhammad's life, the Samaritans don't even exist, because the Samaritans exist when the Assyrians come down and they wipe out the northern kingdom. And what they do is they take those people that are now enslaved and they spread them throughout the Assyrian kingdom. So you have, and then they take Assyrians and they bring them into that area. So they're basically muddying the genetic pool. And what ends up happening is the former northern kingdom, they begin to intermarry with the Assyrians. And when they intermarry with the Assyrians, the southern kingdom now hates them because they have lost their call as the people of God. And so they refer to them as Samaritans because they are in Samaria, which the Samaritans don't exist until after 722. This is way before 722. So again, Muhammad is taking these Christian ideas, he's moving them into the Quran, but he's making a bunch of mistakes while he's doing it because he doesn't really know the stories. There's countless of these. I just gave you two, but there's countless stories of Muhammad kind of messing up in his translation or his putting in. So the last slide I'm going to put up, I'm sorry, is Jim's slide. There are your authors of the 6 hadith that they consider to be highly regarded. There are many hadiths. Some of them they consider weak. These are the 6 that they consider highly regarded, and these 2 are the main 2 that are used. So those are and those are your authors there. I don't have time for questions, concerns, issues, or comments, or counseling. We got to go. Go to church.